The town of Cold Hollow had always been quiet, nestled deep in the dense pines of northern Maine. The townsfolk were few, their lives simple, but they whispered of the woods. They said it held secrets, ancient dark secrets that should never be disturbed. It started with a boy, Danny Grayson, vanishing one bitter November night. He had been playing near the forest edge, chasing the last golden leaves fluttering in the cold wind. His mother, Martha, called him for dinner, her voice echoing through the trees, but only the wind answered. By dawn, search parties scoured the woods, but no trace of Danny was ever found. 5 years passed and the grief-stricken town tried to move on. The forest remained a silent sentinel, its secrets buried beneath thick moss and twisting roots. But the whispers grew louder. Hunters spoke of shadows darting between the trees, of voices, soft, beckoning, calling them deeper into the woods. Maggie Harper, a journalist from Boston, arrived in Cold Hollow in early spring. She was chasing a story, her career teetering on the edge of irrelevance. Rumors of the forest's curse had reached her desk, and she was determined to uncover the truth. She rented a small cabin near the woods, her laptop and camera her only companions. The first night was uneventful, save for the unnerving stillness of the forest. No crickets, no rustling leaves, just an oppressive silence that pressed against the cabin walls. Maggie dismissed it as paranoia. The second night she heard it, a faint whisper just beyond the tree line. "Help! Me!" Her heart raced. Grabbing her flashlight and recorder, she stepped onto the porch. The whisper came again, faint but desperate. "Who's there?" she called, her voice trembling. The woods swallowed her words. She ventured closer, the beam of her flashlight cutting through the darkness. Her breath frosted in the cold air. The whispers grew louder, weaving together in an eerie harmony. "Help us!" Maggie stopped at the forest's edge, her instincts screaming to turn back. But the journalist in her pushed forward. She stumbled upon a clearing, the ground littered with animal bones, arranged in strange patterns. At the center stood a withered tree, its bark twisted like tortured faces. She reached for her camera, but the whispers erupted into screams. "Leave!" Terrified, Maggie fled back to her cabin. The next morning, she met Sheriff Nolan at the diner, her hands still shaking as she recounted the night's events. The sheriff, a grizzled man in his 60s, listened quietly. When she finished, he sighed and leaned back in his chair. "You should leave, Ms. Harper," he said. "The forest isn't safe." Maggie pressed him for details, but he refused to elaborate. Frustrated but undeterred, she decided to investigate further. She interviewed the townsfolk, piecing together a chilling history. The forest, they said, had always been cursed. Native tribes avoided it, calling it the place of weeping shadows. In the 1800s, a logging camp vanished overnight, leaving only blood-soaked ground and the distant sound of sobbing. That night, Maggie couldn't sleep. The whispers returned, louder and more insistent. She recorded them, her rational mind struggling to comprehend the words. "Free us, before it wakes." Before what wakes? The next day, Maggie ventured deeper into the woods. She followed the whispers, her determination outweighing her fear. She discovered ruins, crumbling stone walls overgrown with vines. At the center was a stone altar, stained dark with age. Symbols were etched into the stone, symbols she didn't recognize. As she examined the altar, she felt a presence, a cold, suffocating force that made her skin crawl. She spun around, but the forest was empty, until it wasn't. A shadow emerged from the trees, its form shifting and indistinct. Eyes, if they could be called that, glowed like dying embers. "You shouldn't be here," it said, its voice a guttural growl. Maggie froze, her mind unable to process the impossible. "What are you?" she whispered. The shadow didn't answer. Instead, it lunged. Maggie ran, branches clawing at her face and arms. The whispers turned to screams, a cacophony of voices urging her to flee. She burst into the clearing near her cabin, collapsing on the ground. The sheriff found her the next morning, disheveled and incoherent. He took her to his office, where she recounted everything. Nolan's face grew pale. "It's waking," he muttered. "What's waking?" Maggie demanded. "The hunger," he replied. Sheriff Nolan explained that the forest was a prison, a barrier keeping an ancient evil at bay. The whispers were its victims, trapped souls warning of the entity's awakening. Maggie refused to leave. She had to stop it. As the days passed, the forest grew darker, its malevolence seeping into the town. People disappeared. Shadows moved where they shouldn't. The whispers became deafening.